All right. If you have your Bibles, Matthew 14, like Johnny just read. Thank you, Johnny, for reading that. And I'm going to give this to you just to put on the chair there. Thank you. Matthew 14. Jesus had quite a day. Quite a day. I think as we read, sometimes we get lost in the days that, kind of what happens here, what happens there. Jesus loses his cousin, and, there's a lot of people who think John the Baptist might have even been the rabbi of Jesus. So Jesus may have followed John for a good amount of years, and he didn't die of old age, just a horrible, brutal death. And then the Bible goes, Jesus is trying to get away, and the crowds followed him all the more. I think a lot of us parents understand what that's like. You try to shut your bedroom door, I just need a moment. Or, there's the age-old, mom trying to take a breath, and the kid's trying to climb under the door to see what's going on. And it just feels like the crowds just won't give Jesus a break here. And Jesus, as Jesus does, he does a miracle, he feeds them, and then he gets the disciples in the boat and get out of here, I need a moment. And then a storm comes, and there the disciples are again, wondering if he's a ghost, and just, it really makes you wonder sometimes the patience of Jesus, just how awesome it was. But we're going to look specifically here at the story of Peter walking on the water. Jesus has had a lot happen, and it gets to the night, and there is just so much that happens there. I imagine the disciples as they're rowing that night, and just the drama of a boat almost tipping over. It's been 4 years now. If you come over to my house, I have 4 pictures on my dining room wall. And one of them is of Trevor in a life vest. And so if you're at crew today, or if you end up coming over my house, that trip, Trevor was 4, and I took him to the Boundary Waters in Minnesota, which is right up on the Canadian border. And I took him on a camping trip. Now, I was awfully brave taking a 4-year-old boy up there with a couple friends of mine, and there's a reason why I haven't gotten back yet. I love camping. It was just a lot. It's a lot. It's a lot to be 4 to 5 hours away from the nearest thing, and to have your 4-year-old boy who is barely potty trained and who still needs bedtime stories in the middle of the night when there's storms and all that. And as we were leaving, we were coming home, so you canoe 2, 3, 4 hours out. And then you meet a boat, and that boat takes you another 30 minutes in before you're there. So we're canoeing out. It's real early. The sun's still coming up. And this windstorm hit. And we're going into the wind, and so you're making no time whatsoever. So I got this boat loaded down. I brought way too much stuff. I brought bag upon bag of snacks. I brought an iPad because, when you're out in the wilderness, there's nothing better than when your child can't sleep. Hey, let's watch a little something on the iPad, right? And I have, just everything you can possibly think of. Trevor is sitting in the middle. I'm sitting in the back of the canoe. And a guy I went to high school with, he's a little bit younger than I am, was sitting at the front. And we're canoeing into this wind. And I had thought about halfway through this lake, if we tip over and I survive, I'm never going to hear the end of this from Hannah, right? It's just you brought Trevor out and you guys tipped over. But then I also had this thought, if we tip over, I don't know that I could swim that to shore and grab him. And let me tell you, that's a terrifying thought. And then, as the wind started hitting us, the boat started turning. And instead of hitting the front of the boat, the waves started hitting the side. Oh, wow. Talk about heart in your throat situations. And I feel those emotions. I hope as you read the Bible, you sometimes can experience some of that. I feel that for the disciples as they're trying to make their way across the lake like Jesus told them to. Just that moment of, are we going to die? Is this what happens? And then Jesus walks by. And Peter, like Peter so often does, goes, hey, Jesus, if it's you, tell me to come out there. And he does. And in typical Peter fashion, he starts to sink. And so Jesus asks him a question I think we've misunderstood for a long time. He grabs him by the hand, and he says, oh, you of little faith, why did you doubt? And if you're like me, and you've had a poor male influence in your life, my father left when I was young, but the memories I have of my father are not great, right? And I've had male teachers who scolded me. It's just kind of how life is. I imagine Jesus at the boat kind of scolding Peter. Why'd you mess up? Come on, Peter, do better. You can do better than that. And it wasn't until over the last few months that I've come to realize that I don't think Jesus was doing that. I think Jesus is asking Peter very, very calmly, what happened? You were so excited to walk out onto this water. Peter, you were so ready to join me out here. You were so ready to be like me. And then you started thinking, why did you doubt? Not just why did you doubt in me, but Peter, why'd you doubt yourself? I called you out here, Peter. I thought you could do it. Why'd you doubt? And so this morning, I want us to ask ourselves that same question. Why do we doubt? But not in this accusatory way. Instead, I want us to ask us in a reflective way. I want us to look at our lives, and we're going to look at a couple things here and figure out, why are we sinking? What made us doubt? You know, there's a picture. You could throw that up, guys. Hannah, if you could grab that out of the box for me when you get a second. There's a picture. Look at that. That is, how old am I there? Probably 9, 10? Ma, what do you think? 9 or 10-year-old Mitchell there in a fedora. We have to notice the matching America shirts. That's my brother there on the right, Nick. And if you can't tell that well, he's wearing a beret. He's making fun of me in that picture. And even at 7 or 8 years old, my brother knew how to make fun of me. You know, when I was a couple months before this, I read a book. And the book for me was transformational for me as a boy. And that was Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. Were you expecting some sort of like devotional book from Mitchell? Mitchell at 8 years old was reading theological seminary books. No, Mitch was reading Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. And I loved history. I still do. And so you have this book that talks about a man who was there, and Indiana Jones has this really complicated history with his father. He always wondered if his father really loved him. His mom died when he was young, and so in the book he has this moment with his father where he tries to tell him, I've saved something archaeologically. He's young, and his father kind of just puts him off, you know, tells him to go count in Greek and walk away. And he loses this beautiful artifact. And I'm not going to recount the whole Indiana Jones movie. You can go read it or watch it if you'd like. But long story short, the bad guy at the beginning of the book gives him a fedora. And that fedora becomes the hat that you see Indiana Jones wear. You know, he always has that whip and he always has a fedora. And I read that book, and at the end of the book, he kind of saved this religious artifact called the Holy Grail. And I remember reading that book and being like, I want to be like Indiana Jones. Right? Somehow not quite imagining what it meant to actually have a whip and do archaeology. It just was really cool. So that year for Christmas, I asked for a fedora. And I'm glad it wasn't like the fedoras of today that are like, you know, real rigid, real small, sitting on top of your head. It still looks kind of cool. But you know what happens when an 8, 9, 10-year-old boy gets a fedora? He gets made fun of, right? He gets made fun of because that might be a poor fashion choice for a boy going into middle school, all right? I'd wear it on Sundays. It would get cold outside. I remember the emotions of wanting to put on my fedora because I thought I looked cool. I'd put it down over my eye like you could see there as it was coming in, and I felt so cool. I felt amazing. I felt like William Lubriel as he walks in wearing his hat. And I'm not making fun of him because I told him last week just the lifestyle choices of that. But you can even see in the picture, my brother's wearing a beret, and he put on my mom's beret, and he put up his hand like a French man, and like it's supposed to be like just that's who my brother is. But you know what happened? At some point, I stopped wearing that fedora. Not because it didn't fit, but because I lost sight of who I was. And it wasn't until a couple of months ago, Mark Perez and I were talking, and I told him, I was like, you know, Mark, I always wanted the cowboy hat made for me. And Mark, in typical Mark, if you know Mark fashion, he goes, I got a guy. I'm like, oh, okay. And sure enough, he takes me up to the south side of Chicago to some guy named Enrique, who for the last 30 years makes cowboy hats. And in this shop that can't be bigger than this room, I mean, it maybe is half this room, Enrique kind of asks you what you're looking for, and I had no idea what I wanted. And I opened up the box, and I saw the black hat, and I was brought back to the boy that wanted that fedora. And Enrique took, I don't know, maybe 30, 45 minutes. He trimmed down the hat. He asked me what shape I wanted it in. I took like 7 pictures and sent it to Hannah and made sure she liked it. And you know what? I put on that hat, and for a few seconds, I was that boy in the fedora again. And then I put it back in the box, and I didn't wear it. Why? Because I was worried. Because I was still struggling with the feelings of, man, what are people going to think? Man, it's not really who I am, right? That's not me. And it wasn't until, well, actually it was last week, but it wasn't until I started really preparing this sermon that the Lord was just very obvious in my life to show me, you know, Mitchell, I made you as you are. I brought things into your life that made you who you are. And I brought that into your life a couple months ago for a very specific reason. You know, Peter doubted because he lost sight of 2 things. He lost sight of who Jesus is, or just lost sight of Jesus. And he lost sight of what Jesus thought about him. You know, it's easy for us to mock Peter. Peter has a rough history in the Bible, all right? Peter gets called. There's a good chance Peter's the oldest one there. So Peter gets called, and then Peter has moments like this. He has moments where he doubts Jesus very openly, and Jesus calls him Satan, which, I don't know if there's any coming back from the Son of God calling you Satan. There are hard moments like that. He opens his big mouth at the Last Supper, and he says, Jesus, I will never deny you. And like less than 12 hours later, Peter's denying him. It's just these moments after moments. He gets into it with Paul in the book of Acts over how he's acting. And it's easy. It's easy. Don't get me wrong. It's easy for us to look at Peter and go, oh, Peter, right? But I think we have a bit of all of us, myself especially. Because Peter at some moment is sitting in that boat, and he says, Jesus, if that's really you, tell me to come out there. I think we've all been there. Water in the Bible often represents chaos. It's this place I can't live. Matt's talked about this before. We're not like this water-breathing aquatic animal. We have boats. We can make a makeshift island, but we're not some sort of hybrid that can somehow live in the water. And this was terrifying for the people in the Bible's day, right? There was no science to explain what water is. They just knew that at some point, an ancestor of mine got onto a ship and never showed back up. Or I've been on a ship in the middle of a storm, and it was terrifying, and I knew that if I didn't get to shore, I was going to die. And so water for them was this chaotic thing. It's what was present before creation. And God takes that chaos and makes it into order. And for a lot of us, we step out every day into chaos. Every day. Sometimes it's in our home, sometimes it's in the world, it's at our jobs, sometimes it's in the places it's not supposed to be, but sometimes it's in our marriage. We step out every day and it's into chaos. And we find ourselves like Peter, up to our ankles, up to our calves, up to our knees, to our thighs, and we start to feel that water creep up, and that eerie feeling as you're in a pool and that water starts to go up to your nose. Or as you've been in the waves in the ocean, or on a big day in Lake Michigan, and you feel that wave splash over you, and it's like, uh-oh, I'm in trouble. And like Peter, I want us to ask ourselves this morning, what changed? You were so ready to follow Jesus. You were so ready to step out and do what he wanted you to do. Whether it was when you were saved, whether it was when you met him for the first time, whether it's that first time you experienced the Holy Spirit's power. At some point, you woke up and you were ready to step out into the chaos and say, Jesus, I'm with you. Let's do this. Jesus, I've had a great experience with you. I know who I am with you. I know who you are. And you stepped out, and it was like, I'm in trouble. I'm in trouble. This is a lot deeper than I thought it was. This water's a lot colder than I thought it was. Jesus, I'm not ready for this. And we began to sink. And like Peter, the very first thing we lose sight of is Jesus. It says there that when he saw the wind, he began to sink. For many of us, we get so consumed by other things, right? Earlier than like 2010, there was really no big social media things. But now it's like how quickly we could get distracted. How long until we look at our phone and be like, man, I've really been scrolling on Instagram for 25 minutes? Man, it's already that time. I've been on my phone for that long. Or it might be video games. It might be plenty of things that can do it for us. It could be our families. It could be the workload that we have. It could be the problems that we're trying to fix. They don't always have to be bad things, but we look up and we realize that our focus has been drawn off. And here we are in the middle of chaos, not focusing on Jesus. And Peter found himself in the same exact way. And Jesus tries to remind him, you got to keep looking at me. You got to remain on me. There's, and the way the Bible works isn't coincidence. There's a story where Jesus calms the storm just a few chapters before. Remember, the disciples are on the boat and Jesus is sleeping and a crazy storm comes up. Like, Jesus, wake up. If you don't help us, we're going to die. And he essentially sits up and goes, shh, oh, you have little faith, and almost brushes them off. And there's a really interesting statement at the end of that story. The disciples look and they go, what kind of man is this that the winds and waves obey him? But at the end of this story, Peter and the disciples don't say that. They say this, truly, this is the Son of God. You see, they didn't really know who Jesus was. And they're not going to get it yet. The rest of the Gospels tell us the story that it's not until they see the resurrected Jesus do they really fully understand what's going on. And for some of them, it's not until months later. And for a lot of us, we find ourselves like Peter in the middle of chaos, and we've lost sight of Jesus. We've lost sight of him. Whether it's because life has hit us, distractions have hit us, work has hit us, just general things take our distractions away from, distractions take our viewship away from him. We lose sight of who he is. And so if you find yourself sinking this morning, what are you focused on? You focused on the chaos, like Peter was? And maybe we need to ask ourselves, how do I get my focus back on him? You know, the second thing I think Peter lost sight of, and this one's big for me, and this one for me I think really hit home. Peter lost sight of what Jesus thought about him. Let me explain. Jesus calls Peter out to him, you know, and there's this beautiful pattern for Peter when it comes to a boat. Jesus meets Peter, he's in a boat, right? He says, "Come and I will make you fisher of men." Peter gets in a boat multiple times and he meets Jesus incredibly. This time is one of them. And at the end of Peter's story, well, in the Gospels at the end of Peter's story, he runs back into a boat and Jesus shows back up. And it's like Jesus over and over again has to tell Peter, "I want you. Peter, I don't know why you don't get this. I want you." And it's like Peter steps out. He goes, "Jesus, if it's really you, tell me to come to you." And Jesus goes, "Come." And then Peter forgets that Jesus wants him out there. He looks around, he's like, I don't know if I'm supposed to be here. And Jesus goes to Peter, and I think to each and every one of us. He wants us. He wants you. And that's hard in a world today where you're told you're not wanted, whether it's because of the way you look, or it's the way that you are, or what you believe, whether it's from the right or it's from the left. Sometimes you're not conservative enough, sometimes you're not progressive enough, sometimes you're a hater of this, you're a hater of that. Whatever it is, you're constantly told in the world you're not wanted just as you are. And meanwhile, Jesus is sitting out in the middle of the chaos going, "I want you." He tells the disciples over and over again, "I chose you." He calls Peter. He renames Peter. He says, "Peter, you're with me. I'm going to rename you into rock," essentially. He goes, "Listen, you're a vital part of my kingdom." He has Peter walk on the water. Peter says, "You are the Christ." And he goes, "You've been told this by my Father. You are blessed, Peter." He restores him after denying him. He to the Mount of Transfiguration, and Jesus goes, "Come with me, Peter. I want you with me." They go to the Garden of Gethsemane. He goes, "Peter, come on, come with me. I want you with me as I pray." Over and over and over again, Peter's story is filled with Jesus going, "Peter, I want you. Peter, I want you. Peter, I want you with me. Come with me. Come with me." And at some point, Peter steps out on the water and goes, "I don't know if Jesus wants me here." And so he focuses on the winds. He focuses on the waves. And Jesus asks him, "Why did you doubt?" Not in this accusatory, like he's steamrolling over him. He's like, "Peter, why did you doubt that I wanted you here?" So let me ask you this morning, do you feel like Jesus wants you? And we talked about this morning in Sunday school with the young adults, the idea of understanding things and feeling things. And for a lot of us, I think we know Jesus wants us, right? Yeah, of course Jesus wants me. He's Jesus. But do you really feel like Jesus wants you? When you spend time in prayer, if you spend time in prayer, does it feel like you belong? Because I tell you do. When you open the Word and you read stories, does it feel like those stories actually matter to your life? He wants you. And I've been told my entire life I'm not wanted. My dad didn't want me. When I messed things up, I wasn't wanted. And it was very powerful when God showed me that He wanted me and that He had put people in my life who wanted me. So let me tell you this morning, He wants you. He wants you. He wants you to be a part of His kingdom. He wants to walk alongside of you. There's this beautiful picture in the Bible that God wants a partner. He partners with Noah. He partners with Abraham. He partners with Isaac. He partners with Jacob. He partners with Joseph. He partners with Judah. He partners with David. He partners with Saul. He partners with Solomon. He goes through the Bible over and over and over again. God doesn't just grab your life and make you into a robot. He says, "I want you, and I want to work with you." And He's doing that still today. Jesus is still sitting out in the chaos going, "Come. I want you with me. I want you out here." So let me ask you this morning, does Jesus want you? Do you really feel that way? The second thing I think Peter lost sight of, and I think we can see this in a couple different stories, he lost sight of the fact that Jesus thought he could be like him. And this one gets big. I was talking to a friend of mine a couple months ago, and we were talking about this story, and I said, doesn't it feel like Peter just didn't understand that he could be like Jesus? He goes, "Well, he couldn't." I was like, "What do you mean?" He goes, "Oh, he was never meant to walk on the water. He was always going to fail because, Jesus is the creator and this and that." And that really struck my spirit differently Because over and over again in the Bible, Jesus goes, be like me. I give you my power. Go into the world and show them the things I told you about. I'm giving you the power to do things like I did. You can go and do this. If you have the faith, you can move the mountains. If you walk like me, you will have my spirit. You can be like me. They were called Christians as an insult because they were so much like Christ. And we sit here and say, well, he was pretty powerful. I don't know that I could do that. You know? We talked about forgiveness this morning in Sunday school. I don't know if I could forgive like Jesus. You know, it's like someone takes a swing at me, I'm taking a swing back. I can't be like Jesus. Or here's a big one I was telling Hannah about this week. It's really started to bother me when you ask Christians, you know, who they are. And I'm just a sinner. No, you're not. If you are saved, you have Christ in you. You can be like Jesus. Your identity is no longer somebody who is lost. You have been found. Grace has been shown to you. You are no longer this person who is just like wrapped up in sin and bondages. It's like that idea of after somebody has been kidnapped and held for so long, it's called Stockholm syndrome. You kind of fall into this bondage of I'm still trapped. No, that's just a trick. That's a lie by Satan. And Peter is he steps out of this water, and I think he's sitting there and he goes, I can't do this. And how do we know that? What happens in the story before? Peter and the disciples come to Jesus and say, hey, we need to feed these people. It's getting dark. We need to send them into town to feed them. What does Jesus say? You take care of it. And the disciples go, all we have is this. And it's like almost like I feel like we can read Jesus going, give it to me. And he just does it, right? And he goes, oh, you have little faith. Later on in the story in Matthew, they talk more about bread. And he goes, you just don't get it. You just don't get it. It's not about that. And over again, he looks at the disciples. He goes, you can be like me. And so maybe it's not the fact that we have just lost sight of Jesus and we haven't just lost sight of this idea of like he wants us, but maybe it's also this idea that we've lost sight. Jesus has a high view of us. He says, you can do whatever you want with me. Let's go. Let's do this together. It's going to be hard. It's going to be tough, but I'll be there with you. Peter, you can walk out on water. Peter, you can build my church. Peter, you can do miracles. Peter, you can do this. Peter, feed my lambs. Peter, there's so much that I have for you to do. You can be like me, Peter. And Peter over and over again goes, but I'm not you. And I feel like Jesus sits there in the boat, and even the way it reads, they're still standing out on the water, and he just looks at him and goes, why did you doubt? Why? Peter, you can be just like me. I know you can. So what's stopping you? Jesus wants us. Jesus wants us. He wants us to live like him. He wants us so much like that. There is so much that he wants for us. But he also understands that we can be like him. He tells them at the end of his ministry, go into all the world. Right? Spread my message. In just 2 chapters before, or 4 chapters before we just read, Matthew 10, he commissions them and he says, you have my power. Go out and tell people about it. He looks at Peter at the end of his ministry and says, hey, Peter, I love you. Do you love me? Yeah. Well, go feed my sheep. Jesus says, at one point, I'm the shepherd. And then he looks at Peter and says, you can be a shepherd as well. For so many of us, we get so hung up on the fact that Jesus must not be happy with me. Oh, he's so disappointed in me. Oh, this, oh, that, all negative. And I feel like Jesus is sitting there going, you don't get it? That's all in your head. I have grace for you. I have mercy for you. You can live a life just like me. You don't have to be in bondage to your sin. You don't have to live like you always have, Peter. Get out of the boat. Peter, I've told you over and over again, follow me. I will make you a fisher of men. And Peter steps out of the boat and he sinks. Peter, I've told you over again, come on, let's go. We can do this. And it's like I don't think there's frustration there. I think there's just this desperation that Jesus has where he looks at our life and says, you can be like me. I promise you, you can be like me. You can do exactly what I'm doing. You will live a life. You will sacrifice yourself for others. You can love people radically. You don't have to hate those who hate you. You can pray for them. You don't have to be in bondage to the sin that Satan has put you in bondage to. You don't have to worry about your immorality. You don't have to worry about the pornography. You don't have to worry about the life you've lived. Why? Because I have given you life and life abundant. Live it. Be like me. Go out into the world. Be a light. You can do that. And Peter gets out of the boat, and it's like he struggles with it. It's like he's like, oh, I don't know if I could be like him. And what I love about Peter is the end of his life. We don't read it in the Bible, but from what history tells us, Peter's death is one of crucifixion. It's a popular death. I mean, in the Roman world, crucifixion was the way they killed you. And there's just this moment I feel, and I can get really emotional with this. As they go, hey, Peter, we're sentencing you to death by crucifixion. If it just like hits him all at once, and he's like, I'm even going to die like him. Oh. For Peter, I have to imagine there was no greater honor. There's just like this, and history tells us he even wants to be crucified upside down because he says, I'm not worthy to die like Jesus did. And for Peter, as he steps out, I think as a lot of us, where we look at our lives, where we take this time to go, okay, why am I doubting? Well, okay, I've lost sight of Jesus. Yes. Does Jesus want me? Okay. What does Jesus think about you? What does he really think about you? Not I know he loves me. I sang a worship song today, so I can feel a little bit of his love. But in the deepest, darkest parts of your heart, the ones you think you're keeping hidden, what does he think about you? What does he think about you on the day you forgot to read your Bible? What does he think about you on the week that you haven't prayed yet? You think he's disappointed with you? You think he's sitting up there and he has a dartboard with your picture on it and he's playing darts with it? Do you think he's, just forgot about you? Oh, that's a big one. Do you think that maybe he's indifferent? So-and-so's down there. Whatever happens. You think he only sees you when you do good things? That's not my Jesus. Jesus is sitting out in the middle of this chaos and he's calling us to him. Jesus is sitting out there and he says, listen, I know you can do this. I know you can be like this. Trevor was inspired. I don't see him here today. Trevor was inspired by Orrin Flesher. Orrin is really into Rubik's Cubes. At one point, Orrin had like a 6x6, which was like, it looked like way too many Rubik's. I think it was 6x6. And he's just solving it. And again, solving a Rubik's Cube is all about just learning the process of which ones to turn. And so Trevor was inspired, and I can't remember who, but did you buy him the Rubik's Cube? I think you did, right? And so my mom bought him a Rubik's Cube. It's a little 2x2, not hard to solve. But Trevor has refused over and over again to solve the Rubik's Cube. And I've told Trevor, you're the smartest boy I know. You can solve this Rubik's Cube. Trevor, I know you can solve this Rubik's Cube. Trevor, all you got to do is watch a YouTube video. You can learn how to solve this Rubik's Cube. I know you can do it. And a lot of us are like Trevor. We're sitting there and we're like, I can't do this. And I wonder if Jesus is just sitting there going, I know you can. I know you can do this. This is easy. And we sit there, we go, I can't be like you, Jesus. Oh, I'm so upset. We just had an election cycle and it's like, oh, I hate so-and-so. Oh, somebody talked about this. Oh, I can't be like Jesus, right? We're called to sacrifice. Oh, no, that's not, no, I can't do that. We're called to pray for those who hate us. Oh, I'm not going to pray for them. They would despitefully use me, even though the Bible says exactly what we're supposed to do, right? Oh, I can't do that, right? Oh, I can't be like Jesus in this way. And Jesus is like, yes, you can. In just a minute, the worship team's going to get up and we're going to sing a song. Who You Say I Am is the title. I always call it I Am Who You Say I Am. There's a beautiful thing about how music inspires our soul. It gives us language that we don't normally know what to say. And just the creativeness of what people say sometimes does that for us. I want you to think about a few things today. Where's Jesus? And it's not just, oh, he's up there. Yeah. Where's Jesus in your life? Is he tucked away in a closet that you kind of compartmentalize with whatever devotions you do? Is he in this building and you only get to experience him on Sunday mornings and Wednesday nights? Is he sitting in a room judging you for what you think you're doing? Where's Jesus at? Secondly, what does he think about you? Do you feel wanted by Jesus? Do you feel like Jesus cares about you? Even when you're suffering, even if you've messed up, does he want you? And what does he think about you? As the worship team comes up, we're gonna sing this song, and I would love for you to sing these words, and we'll do an invitation after. But I'd love for you to think about that. At some point, you were like me in the fedora, and you knew exactly what you wanted to be. At some point, you were a kid, you were an adult, and you experienced Jesus, and you were there, and you knew what it was like, and you were ready to do it. And then something changed. What changed?